This conference will now be recorded.
All right, and I hope this font is clear for everyone, guys, offline. Is it okay? Okay. Uh,
Yes, yes.
just give me a second. This is going a little too fast. And yes, there you go. Okay, great. So, very good morning again, guys, and thank you for joining the session online. Thank you for taking your time and coming down offline. And thank you for joining the session out here. Before we get started out here, I'd just like to give a very brief introduction about myself. So this is Kiran here, and I overall have like about 8 and a half of experience out here in the IT industry. And I began my career as an Azure administrator. I worked as an Azure administrator for about 2.5 years, and then I started my journey with DevOps. So I come from an Azure administrator background. I went into DevOps, and I have a good experience with a couple of projects on site and offshore also. And I have various certifications, one of which is Microsoft Certified Trainer. So I, as a trainer, would understand what are the industry requirements, what are, let's say, the day-to-day evolution of the industry. So according to which we kind of design our course. So if you basically inquire, let's say, in the front office, they wouldn't have given you a course curriculum. Reason being, it's really evolving out here. The course is really evolving. So based upon which we kind of design the course in such a way that it matches the very close standards of the industry. So that's about myself, a very brief introduction out here. And before we begin the session out here, I just like to ask you all one quick question out here is that what do you know about cloud computing? When you look at this term called cloud, or when you look at this term known as computing or cloud computing out here, what do you all understand about it? Like, what is the first thought that strikes your mind? Anyone? Like, there is again no right, no wrong answer. I just want to understand what is, let's say, the class that I'm delivering to. So, what do you understand by this term called cloud computing out here? Anyone? Or when it says cloud, what do you really understand about that?
Data storage.
Data storage, okay? Mm-hmm.
Backup is storage.
Okay. 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 Data storage, backup, data centers, couple of loose terms out here, couple of terms out here. Anything else, guys? Anyone? Anything else? Any idea about what really cloud computing is all about out here?
So these are nothing but the servers that are accessed over the internet.
Servers that
Getting
are accessed.
services,
Okay.
getting
Servers that
services.
are. Okay. Okay. So if I just do a Google, okay, if I just do a Google search and put in the term what is cloud computing out here. And yes, guys, can you please go on mute? I'm just getting a little echo from the online class. Can you please go on mute if you don't mind? Okay. So thank you for that. So if I just loosely search on the internet on what cloud computing really is, this is the definition what you generally get. This is a huge definition wherein it says, guys, again, can you please go on mute? I'm just requesting, can you please go on mute out here? I'm getting a little echo. Just give me one quick second. Okay, thank you. Let's get started again. All right, so this is what the internet definition really tells you is that it's simply put, it's delivery of services and infrastructure over the internet. Now, again, there are a lot of technical jargons out here. Is that it's telling delivery of services and infrastructure over the internet and all those stuff out here. Let's try to break this out and let's try to understand this at a very basic level. For which, let's get started with a simple example out here. And for this example, I'd like to imagine that you're not in, let's say, 2022. Let's go back all the way and kind of go into a year called 1990, where all this journey, all these begin. All these things kind of begin. So let's say you are a user. So I am, let's say, I as such am a user. I have an idea, meaning I, let's say I'm a business graduate. I am a business graduate back in 1990, wherein I had an idea called I will design an application called Ola. Okay, so everyone has used Ola, Ubers, and all that stuff, right? So this is an application wherein you can go ahead, book your cabs over a mobile platform, order your cab, order your booking, etc. So what I did is that in order for me to help build this application, in order for me to create this application, since I'm an MBA graduate, I do not have the understanding of, let's say, the coding part and everything. So what I did is that I hired a team of developers. So there was a team of developers or programmers whom we loosely call like that, whom I hired. And I said that okay, fine, great. I hired a team of developers out here. They have helped me in order to develop this code. They said okay, fine. This is the code. Take it. Now you can play around with it. So I have the code right now. Now I need to make sure that I take this code, turn it into an application, and deliver it over the internet. Whom should I deliver it to? To all the end users. Whoever wants to use my service, I want to go ahead and just deliver this service out here. This is what I want to do over the cloud, or this is what I want to do over the internet. This is what I'd like to do. And back in 1990, now the first challenge that I face is that how should I deliver it? In order to deliver it, this application needs to be running somewhere. It needs to be running from somewhere, right? That somewhere I'm calling it as an infrastructure. Okay, and that somewhere I'm calling it as an infrastructure. Now, what loosely infrastructure is? Yes, please take a seat. What loosely infrastructure is? Nothing but just imagine that infrastructure in my case is a laptop with some amount of RAM, some amount of CPU, some amount of capacity to store my code, to interact with my code. Okay, so this infrastructure out here is helping me display the code to the entire world. So this is the backend infrastructure, which is now the heart of my entire service. Again, I cannot just take my code, put it on top of my laptop, and then display it to the entire world. I cannot do that. The reason being, our laptops are not meant for business consumption. These are not heavy machines. These are for home consumptions and, let's say, office consumptions and etc. For individual purposes. That's the reason you call them as PCs, personal computers. So what I think right now is that then how do, or which what kind of an infrastructure do I go ahead and buy? So that's when a term called server comes into picture. This box that you see out here is what we call as a server. Now, what exactly is a server out here is that very simple. A server again is a machine like my laptop, but just imagine that this is 1000 and 10,000 times into my laptop. That's the capacity that this server or this particular machine has. Meaning, let's say my laptop has 1 GB of RAM, the server has somewhere around 1000 GB of RAM. So these are high capacity machines designed for this purpose, to take your code and deliver it over the internet so that users can use it. Great. So my problem is solved. I can just go ahead, get a server, put a code on top of it, and done. Basically my code is out there and people can use it. It's not as simple as the way I see it. A reason being, you just cannot go ahead and buy a server online. You just cannot go to Amazon.com and say, okay, fine, I need a server. You cannot do that. You need to order a server. Then how do I order a server? I am in India. I want to develop an application here. I intend to target this application to people in India, not, let's say, across the world. I intend to target it for the end users that are sitting in India. This is what I want to do. So I say, okay, fine, then I have to purchase a server and ask them to ship it out to India. So I go to a companies like, let's say, one of the popular companies that manufacture servers, Dell. So I go to Dell and I say, you know what? I need a server of, let's say, about 1000 GB capacity or 1000 TB capacity. I need it with somewhere around 100 GB of RAM and all that stuff. So I give them an order telling that, you know what, this is a configuration of the server. I want you to deliver it to me. So Dell would say, okay, fine, great. You've given the order. Now, to pay the amount upfront, because if you want to place the server order, you need to pay an upfront amount, and Dell will now start manufacturing it, because this is still 1990 that we are in, right? Now Dell will start manufacturing this out, and Dell will say, okay, fine, you know what? Give me like about 60 to 90 days. This is 2 to 6. I mean, this is 2 to 3 months I'm looking at, because for me to manufacture and then ship the server from, let's say, a country like US to a country like India, I need at least some amount of time to process this all these things. So I have hired these developers, right? They have developed, they are doing their work, and they are ideal for the next let's say for the next 2 to 3 months. They're just ideal out here, meaning they're not doing any work. They just developed, everything is good, and I'm now waiting. So right now what I'm doing is that I have an expenditure, meaning I'm paying my salaries to my developers, because I have to pay them on a monthly basis. Then I'm waiting for about 60 to 90 days for the server to come in, and once the server comes in, I also need to store this somewhere. This is not unlike like a computer. I cannot just put it, let's say, on my desk. I need something called as a server room, meaning it should be an individual basically room with individual electrification, ventilation, and everything. So you need ACs and all that stuff in order to make sure that they don't get heated. So what I'm talking about here is that I need a team of maintenance engineers. This is where I'm coming to. So I got the server. I waited for about 60 to 90 days patiently. I was paying my developers. Now I basically go ahead and hire a team of maintenance engineers who have the knowledge on how to maintain a server, so that your server doesn't get overheated, so that you don't have short circuits and all that stuff. So I hire a team of maintenance engineers right now. I build a server room. So I build a big room with all the air conditions and etc. So what I'm doing essentially out here is that I am doing something known as capital expenditure, investment, before my even my business starts out. That's, I'm doing an investment even before my business picks up. I don't know whether my business is, will be accepted, or whether my business will be a flop. I don't know that. But even before that, I am taking a leap of faith, and I'm telling, okay, fine, let me go ahead and invest it, and I may get return. I may get some return or something, is what I'm now giving a statement out here. Okay, great. Now the servers are in, the developers are working, the maintenance engineers is also working. Now your application is also being interacted, meaning your application is also being received by an end user. The end users are basically able to go ahead, interact with your application, and etc. There are two possible scenarios out here. Scenario one is that your application is a very big hit, okay, meaning a lot of people are using your application. So let's understand the scenario one here. In the first scenario, what really happens out here is that, okay, fine, when I bought this server, I bought it with an idea that I had a word with my technical team, and my technical team said that, you know what, the application that we are designing and the application and the crowd that we are intending, it might mean what I anticipate, meaning as a technical team, what I anticipate is that per a minute you can get somewhere around 1000 people. 1000 people will visit your application per a minute. This is called as the incoming traffic on your application. So depending upon your incoming traffic, you need to design, or you need to basically understand what your capacity is, capacity of the backend infrastructure. So based on this idea that there will be about 1000 people that are visiting my website, I ordered for a server with 1000 terabyte capacity. The server is in, but the issue right now is that my application is a huge hit, and instead of 1000 people, there are 10,000 people visiting my application per minute. This is something that I did not calculate. This is something basically, or this is something that I did not really anticipate. So what happens right now is that this server that I purchased may not be able to handle that capacity, may not be able to handle that incoming traffic. This is the first issue. If the server is not able to handle the incoming capacity, what will happen is that you as a user, you are trying to book your cab is telling, okay, fine, this is great. You go to the payment gateway, there you get a 404 error telling that, you know what, the payment gateway is unavailable, or there is an issue with your payment, something like that. These happens because your backend infrastructure is not able to support your capacity. it'll simply tell you that, you know what, I will not be able to support this kind of a capacity. So I cannot take your request. This is what happens. So me as a business, I am now concerned because I am losing a lot of customers, right? I'm losing a lot of customers. So what I do is that now I need to increase this capacity. If I need to increase this capacity, again, this is a very limited physical infrastructure. Like my laptop, I cannot go ahead and let's say add 10,000 GB to my laptop. In the same way, server also acts in the same way out here. So I again go ahead to the manufacturer, which is Dell, and I say, you know what, I want another server. I will probably put an order for another box. Please go ahead and take this order out here. So what will Dell say is that Dell will again tell you the same thing, is that, you know what, great, you have placed the order. You are a repeating customer. I appreciate that. But I again need 60 to 90 days to deliver this, kind of capacity to you. Because again, I need to understand what is the shipping and I need to basically do all those things out. So I'll at least take 60 days. This is the minimum time that I'll take, which is 2 months for me to deliver this particular server to you. And what about those 2 months out here? Meaning, what about the customers that I'm losing in those 2 months? I mean, in today's generation, like 1 day is enough to lose a business. 1 day is enough to lose the customer trust that you do have. I'm talking about 2 months out here. Now, this was the issue back in those days when you had to go ahead and if you had an idea to start a business, you had to go ahead and buy these infrastructures, which is called physical infrastructure out here. You have to store this infrastructure. So there's a lot of capital expenditure. So that's the reason you did not hear a term called startup culture back then, because startup culture and everything is something, is let's say, is a loose word right now, is let's say is a very easy word right now, is a very easy thing to go ahead and start a business right now. Again, this is just scenario one that I'm talking about. Let's talk about scenario two also, wherein your business did not take off. Your business right now is not being accepted. People are still okay to go ahead and bargain with the autos, and they're able to make sure life gets easy. In the scenario two, if my business is not working out, the developers, I can say, you know what, I do not have a project, so I can, let's say, I can basically leave them, I can relieve them. The maintenance engineers, I still want them because I have servers to maintain. Now what do I do about the server? Can I sell it somewhere? Like, can I go to OLX and sell it somewhere? No, I cannot sell it. Reason being, again, this is a very heavy machine. Not everyone will, not a lot of people will go ahead and buy the server. So now I am stuck with the server with a 1,000 terabyte machine which I don't know what to do, which I don't really know what to do. So again, I'm stuck with this huge capital expenditure. I've spent a lot of dollars, I spent a lot of rupees out here for maintaining all these things. Now I don't know what to do. So that's the reason this picture wasn't favoring anyone. Neither the manufacturer, because they weren't getting a lot of orders, neither the business, because they aren't willing to take that risk to go ahead and, let's say, buy these servers or put these servers in, etc. Now this is the very big risk basically I'm talking about, because of which, give me one quick second out here, because of which a lot of companies, or I would say the very first company that ventured into it actually was, I mean, you had a lot of companies, but the very first thing that actually ventured into was a company called Amazon, and they came up with a service called AWS, Amazon Web Services. So they came up with something known as Amazon Web Services. Then looking at looking at this success, then another company came in called Microsoft with a service called Azure. So this is what happened. So what they said is that this model really is not helping anyone. Let's a little bit, basically turn this model around and deliver this model over the internet. Meaning, how did they turn it? What Microsoft and AWS did is that they did whatever you did earlier. Meaning, they went ahead, placed the order with Dell. They said, you know what, I have the money, I can go ahead, buy your service. Not one, not two, but many servers. I'll place it in a room, I'll maintain it, I'll make sure that it has proper ventilation, it has everything, it has proper maintenance engineers and everyone. I'll maintain this out. And this room that I'm placing this, I no longer call it as a server room, rather I'll call it as a data center. So I now call this as a data center of this. they say, okay, fine, I'll stack all these things in a room, and now I'll call it as a data center. All I expect the user to have is an internet connection. That's it. If you have an internet connection, and if you are a subscriber to Azure or AWS, any of the cloud providers, I can deliver the infrastructure, meaning whatever capacity that I have, over the internet, so that you can use it, deploy your applications, make sure that your application runs on the infrastructure, and everyone's happy. So what this is doing really is that if I now want to start a business, I just need an idea. All that is required is just an idea and someone to develop that idea. That's it. I don't need maintenance engineers. Neither do I need a team of, let's say, a lot of basically sales guys who go ahead and procure these servers, buy these servers, etc. I don't have to do this right now. So there is a lot less burden on me now. Again, let's talk about two scenarios. A, my application is a huge hit. So in the first case, when I initially went ahead and I signed a contract with the cloud provider, meaning I'm subscribing to the cloud provider, I initially said that, you know what, I just need 1000 GB capacity. The first case, that's what we are talking about, is that 1000 terabyte capacity. The cloud provider says, okay, fine, great, I'll give it to you. Again, in the first case, this 1000 TB capacity that I have basically went ahead and purchased is not sufficient for me because there is a lot of traffic. I did not anticipate that this is the amount of traffic that I'll get. This is the first scenario out here. Now again, I go back to the cloud provider and I say, you know what, I basically cannot live with this 1000 terabyte. I need more amount of capacity because there is a lot of people who are visiting my website. The cloud provider say, okay, fine, great. Allow me 2 minutes. I'm not taking 2 months. Just give me 2 minutes. I'll scale you up. This is called scalability. That's what is the biggest advantage of what cloud has done to the entire industry. That right now you can be literally, let's say you don't have to think about what your capacity really is, what is the traffic really is. You just can go ahead, design your applications the way they are, and you can just be worry free about the backend infrastructure. Because right now the backend infrastructure is now taken care by your service provider. Let's say in our case, since we are interested in learning Azure, I'll say Microsoft. So Microsoft is now my backend provider. Microsoft is now taking care of the entire backend infrastructure. So that's what the next slide really talks about, is that what really is the advantage of having, let's say, the cloud, is that all these things are here. You're saving immensely on the cost, meaning you're not now buying the servers, you're renting the servers. There is a huge difference between buying and renting something. Buying, you own it. If you want to sell it, it's very difficult. Rent is like without any commitment. You can go ahead, use it, pay for what you use, and you can, if you, let's say, if it's not working out, you can just come out of it. That's the reason you see a lot of startup culture today, wherein wherein we have examples of businesses starting with about 1,000 rupees per month. Like that's let's say the initial investment that you actually need out here. And then there is 24 by 7 availability out here, meaning here right now you have a cloud provider who's now in the backend, who's helping you in order to maintain your services, in order to make sure these services are delivered, in order to make sure the services are reliable, and you're just paying for the entire package. So any questions till here, guys? Anyone, anything till here? I'll just take a quick pause. Any questions till here? Anyone, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions, guys? Online, offline? And are you all able to hear me? Am I still connected with you all?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions? Is everyone able to follow? Am I too fast, too slow? Are we all good?
Good. So one small thing.
Please go ahead.
Sir, is AWS and Azure both are connected? I mean, both are the same? Or what are the differences?
So what are the differences? We'll get into the differences between what AWS and then Azure is. But at this point, two cloud providers out there available in the market. or
Okay.
out of a lot of cloud providers, there are two popular names. Because again, there is AWS, there is Azure, there is GCP that is coming up, Google Cloud Platform, and there is Salesforce. There are a lot of clouds that are available, but these are two popular brands who's going ahead and
Oh,
giving you the service. You'll also understand what are the pros and what are the cons between cloud providers, so that you can take a good decision before you can go ahead and let's say understand why do you need to join let's say one cloud versus the other.
yes, sir.
Okay, any more
Thank you.
questions, guys? Yeah. Anyone, anything else before we go ahead? Okay. So
Sir,
again,
what
guys,
is the
requesting.
meaning of
Yep, go ahead, please.
reliable?
I'm sorry.
So, what is the meaning of reliability?
So reliability is that again, it's being reliable, meaning the service is always available for you, irrespective of let's say whether there are any issues. The cloud provider out here, which is let's say Microsoft in my case, will help you resolve that very quick. That's called reliability. In a technical terminology, we call this as SLA, service level agreement. So we call it either a reliability or let's say an SLA out here. Does that answer your question in brief? All right, so let me get back here. So again, since we are dealing primarily with what cloud really is, let's understand in a very short format on what are the types of clouds that are available out there in the market. Meaning before you go ahead and let's say decide to go ahead and become a student of cloud, it's very important to understand what are the types of cloud available out here, and briefly, in a very let's say brief manner, there are three types of cloud available out here. One is public, the other is private, the third is hybrid. What is this really? Is that in a public cloud model, this is what I'm talking about. Is that in a model called public cloud, you just go ahead, tie yourself up with something like a cloud provider like Azure by Microsoft, and you say, okay, fine, you know what? You help me deliver all these services over the internet. I'll completely be reliant upon you. Whatever applications that I use, I will take your services, I will use it out. This is called public cloud model, wherein you're completely reliant upon a cloud provider, a third party service provider out here. Let's say you are a little bit worried about the security and all these things out. For example, you are a banking organization. You say, okay, fine, you know what? I have a lot of customer database. I don't want to just put it over there in the public internet or in the public cloud. I want to go ahead, buy my own server, maintain my own servers. I still want to go ahead and let's say I will have that particular server room. I will have an internet that is connecting my office to that server room or the data center. In our case, in let's say in a technical terminology, if I am doing that, meaning if I am basically going ahead and maintaining all these things, I now call myself to be on a private cloud, wherein you're going ahead, you're not taking the help of let's say an external provider. You're going ahead, buying all these services, putting it let's say into your own data center, maintaining it. Like banks do this. ICICI, HDFC, they have their own private clouds. We call them as private cloud, meaning they have their own data center. They are okay to maintain. They're okay to share money because again, it is security versus let's say performance and all that stuff. But today we see a lot of this model, guys, which is a hybrid cloud model, which is a combination of public and private. Meaning what right now banking organizations or a lot of organizations are doing is that they are telling, okay, fine, we have now the advantage of a cloud. So let's do one thing. All the data that is not sensitive, meaning it's not customer sensitive and etc., let's put it on the public cloud because it's cheaper, it's easier to maintain and all that stuff. Let's put those on the public cloud. I will still need my private cloud to go ahead and put my or save my data, which is customer sensitive. Meaning I'll take all the sensitive data, put it on my own cloud. I'll take let's say all the data which is not sensitive, put it on let's say the public cloud. So what I'm doing is I am doing a public cloud plus a private cloud. I'm doing a public cloud plus a private cloud. This is where the hybrid cloud model comes in. And a lot of companies today are in here. It is called a hybrid cloud model. Like big, MNCs like let's say Wipro or Cognizant, a lot of companies basically, they host their data on both the cloud models out here. And we look at hybrid cloud model, we look at the public cloud model. Private cloud model is something that we cannot look at because we do not have a data center of our own, so we cannot really go into the private cloud model. So we look at these two models out here while we are doing a lot of classes. We'll primarily rely upon these two models because again, a lot of companies that you work on would either be a public or primarily be a hybrid cloud model. Again, for a private cloud, you will need again, let's say, a knowledge of a data center engineer, or it's not really a cloud, meaning it's not really a cloud knowledge that is required there. You need to basically more, let's say, have knowledge about a data center engineer, a maintenance engineer kind of a knowledge. That's the skill set that private cloud models really look for. So these are the available models. Again, let me just erase this out. And so again, a lot of questions can come is that when you're saying that there are so many clouds that are available out here, primarily being AWS, Azure, GCP, and all these things, then why should we, as let's say the learners, go for Azure? Now that might be a question. And what is the primary difference between AWS and Azure? Now let me get it in this way. Now AWS was the first, let's say, company to venture in a proper cloud business. They said, okay, fine, we will start out a model. So when they started, when AWS started, if you want to interact with AWS, meaning you as a cloud engineer, you as a DevOps engineer, it's your daily role and responsibility to interact with the cloud, to maintain the cloud and etc. Now, as a daily role and responsibility, how do I maintain it? How do I interact with the cloud is the very primary question that I have. Meaning I, as a user, or I, let's say, as an employee, needs to talk with the cloud. If you are talking to a cloud like AWS, you need a very solid understanding of something known as Linux, because AWS primarily runs on Linux. So you need to have the basics and, or let's say, the very kind of advanced understanding of what Linux really is. If you know the language called Linux, that's when you go ahead and, let's say, talk to a cloud called, let's say, AWS. Azure, which came at a later point in time, is a product of Microsoft. And any product of Microsoft you see would offer you something called as GUI, graphical user interface. You will have, let's say, for example, I'm just giving a bare basic example out here, is that the very first computers that we interacted with were running on Linux only. Meaning you need to have commands, you need to basically, for each and everything, even if you want to click a mouse, you need to go ahead and, let's say, give a command to it. But when Microsoft came into picture with something called as Windows operating system, they introduced something called as, let's say, altogether a different customer experience with a GUI, wherein I am now able to see the folders. In Linux, I wasn't able to do that. I'm now able to basically go ahead and interact with the folders. I'm able to see where am I, where, in which location am I, and etc. Because of which, a lot of organizations, whichever you would have worked for, a lot of organizations kind of prefer going for Windows rather than Linux. Until and unless you are, let's say, a hardcore developer who needs Linux operating system, until and unless that is there, a lot of organizations prefer, let's say, going for Windows. And one of the biggest advantages is that Azure has a great integration with Windows, because of which a lot of companies out here prefer Azure over AWS. Right now, they are preferring Azure over AWS. There are now a lot of migration, meaning if you look at the market share, it's still somewhere around, let's say, 49% AWS, 43% Azure. But that number is slightly getting, that's again, let's say, the market dynamics. It all depends upon what the market dynamics really is. But what happened recently is that Microsoft Azure signed out a deal with Geo. If you kind of heard about that, Microsoft Azure kind of signed a deal with a company called Geo, and all the Geo data centers is now being taken care by Microsoft. So with that, the amount of opportunities or the amount of market what Microsoft Azure has kind of opened is really high. And even if you look at the newspaper readings, and even if you look at the numbers out there, especially during 2019 when COVID started, 2020, early 2020 and late 2019, Azure started to pick up, and there is a growth in Azure about 170%. That's the amount of migrations what Azure really did see. And one of the biggest reasons why people choose Azure is that you don't need any prior knowledge to learn Azure. if you are an engineer of AWS, if you are basically into a course of AWS, they would first start with the Linux basics. You need to understand what Linux is. I don't have to do that because you don't even need, or you don't need even need to learn the L of Linux, because Azure offers you a GUI like Windows operating system. So you'll now be able to deal with the cloud. You'll now be able to see the cloud, interact with the cloud. You'll be able to understand where you are, which resource that you're working for, and etc. That is one thing. Second thing, the job market. Now look at the amount of job market. Go to, let's say, LinkedIn, or let's say Naukri, or let's say any of the job portals that are offering. Just type in Azure and see what are the amount of roles that you get to offer. Like you have Azure DevOps engineer, you have Azure administrator, you have Azure security engineer. A lot of roles are now being opened up using Azure, and reason being, more than 80% of the Fortune 500 companies, meaning there is something called as Fortune 500, the top 500 companies out here. More than 80% of them are using Azure right now. And in the initial slide, we were talking about something called as data center, right? Wherein I'm telling that, okay, fine, the cloud provider is buying their servers, putting in something known as a data center. Azure has the largest chain of data centers across the world. Azure offers you somewhere around 54 data centers across the world, mostly located, let's say, in US, Europe, and a lot of in Asia. This is the map basically what Azure is right now in, which means that you have businesses all across the world who are using Azure. So it is just not the Indian market that I'm looking at, it's like the entire international market what I'm talking about. And there is a lot of growth for this particular, let's say, skill. And especially when you're telling something known as Azure DevOps engineer right now, which is now a skill set, which is now, let's say, a primary area what you will be trained into. This is now a very booming area. We'll talk about why this is booming, what the growth is, what DevOps really is, and etc. Again, this is just a market trend on how Azure and Microsoft products have kind of grown out over a period, and it also translates into the number of jobs this is producing. So the job market is very high, and believe me or not, we have a lot of batches that are running in parallel. And if a student rolls out a resume, you'll land up in a job within 45 days. Within 45 days, you'll land up in a job. That's, let's say, the amount of requirement that is out there in the market. So we have that kind of, let's say, a call flow, that kind of, let's say, a growth potential. And also, if you're switching, let's say, from one company to the other, let's say you're going into Azure DevOps right now, you'll at least get, I'm talking about a minimum of 80% hike. That would be the minimum. Let's say we have, let's say, students who got about 150% hike also. So there is a very good amount of hike right now that's being offered, especially when you are coming with a skill set of Azure and a DevOps skill set. I mean, a DevOps skill set out here. So this is what we'll be primarily looking into. And just before I get started, because until now I spoke about what is cloud. I did not speak what a DevOps is. I did not really touch what DevOps is, because DevOps practice needs a cloud in the backend. So you need basically something called as a cloud in order to be a DevOps engineer. So that's the reason I spoke heavily about cloud. But before I go into what DevOps is, I just like to understand. You might have done a lot of Google searches, right? Like what DevOps really is and etc. So can anyone tell me what is the first thought that comes into your mind when you say what DevOps is, or what the term called DevOps out is? Anyone? Anyone
Development,
online?
sir.
Development, okay. Deployment, okay. Development,
Operations.
operations,
Sir,
okay.
everything is done combinedly, sir. Because if any
It is the
error comes in the
combination of
middle,
development and the
everything can
Mhm.
rectify in this easily, easy manner, sir.
It's a
Okay,
combination of development and operations.
so combination of development and operations, okay. Anything else?
Yeah, the work which developers and operations
Mm-hmm.
combinedly do.
The work which developers and operations combinedly do, okay, fine. So to understand this, again, let's get back to an example on how does, let's say, in the first example I said from a business perspective, what happens when you develop an application, what happens when you deploy an application, where do you deploy it, and etc. But let's go into the life cycle of an application development, meaning this is called a software development life cycle that typically happens in an industry. When you actually go into an IT firm, this is what happens. So in the very beginning of everything, I have someone known as a developer or a development team. I'm just not talking about one developer out here. I'm talking about someone called as a development team out here, who's writing a code and who's building or who's developing a code out here right now. So this guy is working, let's say, about 24/7, and he's like writing a code, and he's now working for a company called Ola. He's a developer of Ola. Since we are not kind of sticking on to that particular example, he's now taking a lot of time, and in one language, like let's say Java or Python or something like that, he developed the application. Now, if he developed this application, there should be someone to test it out again, right? There should be someone who can test it out. That's where your quality analysis team comes into picture. There is someone called as QA, quality analysts, who are primarily looking into identifying something known as bugs. We call them as bugs, meaning issues in your code. Meaning you're a developer, you have written your code. It's like you're basically you're taking the help of a team called QA, who's specialized in identifying the issues in your code and telling that, okay, fine, you know what, your code has so many issues and etc. But there is one primary issue that I'm not addressing yet. The developer out here in the organization, and since he's a Java developer, what they did is that they went ahead and they provided a Linux operating system machine to him, because he primarily develops Java over a Linux operating system. So the entire development team is writing their code on, let's say, something known as a Linux operating system out here. What happens is that once you write a code in a particular operating system and you develop a code on a particular operating system, your code takes the properties of that operating system out here. So your code best runs on Linux right now. Now what's happening in the QA example is that the QA team, they don't need Linux. They need a Windows operating system because they have a lot of tools that primarily run on Windows. So what I'm doing is that I'm now presenting a problem that I am testing a code that runs on Java or that runs on Linux in a Windows environment. So I'm taking a Windows operating system and I'm testing my code that primarily is the best suit for Java or best suit for Linux. What will happen right now is that my code is not compatible with a Windows operating system. There will be a lot of issues. And what will the QA tell is that the QA doesn't have the understanding of development again. The QA just is expert. I mean, is an expert in identifying the issues. They will again come back to the development team and they'll say, you know what, the code that you developed has a lot of issues with it. Like there is a lot of issues. Don't give me such a kind of a code. Firstly, fix that code. What will now the developer understand is that, okay, fine, the developer will say, I'll fix some issues. I'll take like about somewhere around 2 or 3 months to fix those issues again, and I'm sending this code back into you. So I fixed it. I took like about 2 or 3 months. I fixed it. Again, I sent to the QA team. Again, the same compatibility issues coming between the developer and the QA team, and there is a constant push and pull between the development and the QA team out here. So let's say one fine day they resolve these issues and they now decide to move forward, meaning the code is now ready. And before the code moves forward, you have a team called as an operations team, who basically specializes in taking the code and making it a smooth transaction between, let's say, the company and the customer. Meaning, in my case, the customers are the entire world. I want to deploy the application. So the operation team out here comes into picture and says, you know what, hold on for a second. Let's not give the code yet to the customer. Let's not give the application yet to the customer. We will again test it out. We'll try testing it out, but this time around, I'm testing it out on a Mac OS, on an Apple laptop, because the operations teams has only been given that particular Apple laptop out here. Now, when I'm testing it on an Apple machine, again it's giving an issue, because again the architecture is different. I'm again testing a code that is developed on a Linux on a Mac machine. Again, there is a lot of compatibility issues. So what is primarily happening is that when I started the entire developmental activity, I promised my client, meaning whoever is my client, in my case it's Ola, I promised my client that, you know what, I'll take about 9 months to give your code entirely. This is what I promised. But what is happening is that the development and the QA to resolve their issues itself is taking about 7 months. They're taking about 7 months of time. I only have 2 months for my code to go live. My sales team or my operations team right now is coming and they're saying, you know what, again this code is not working on my machine. Can you fix it again? Again, I'm losing 2 months. So the commitment period, what I'm promising, is getting pushed and pushed by the day, which is not good either for the business or for the company, because both are losing their name right in the market. So I need to address this compatibility, and I need to figure out a way to make sure that all the three teams work in sync with each other, because the main thing that is missing out here is a sync between the development and the QA, and the QA and, let's say, the operations team out here. So there's a sync that is missing out. I need to figure out a way in order to make sure to get all these three teams together and help them work in parallel. Help them work in parallel. Now, this model that you see on my screen was called waterfall model of development. Meaning, the reason why it is called waterfall model is that it's flowing from one stage to the other and then from the other stage to the other. This is called a waterfall model of development, where there wasn't a lot of coordination between all these teams out there. So I need a team right now. I need a specialized team right now who can think like a developer, but work with also the operations team. That's where a team called DevOps formed into picture. Dev stands for development, Ops stands for operation. My testing is also now a part of DevOps. So right now, I have someone called as DevOps out here, which is Dev, and this is what you see is Ops. So I need a team which can think like a developer and help the operations, which primarily is in place to help bridge the gap between the development and the operations team out here, and to make sure that the entire software development lifecycle is going smooth. This is what needs to happen. This is exactly what needs to happen out here. And I need some tools to help do this, right? Those tools are my DevOps tools. Primarily, we will be dealing with a tool called Azure DevOps. So what I did is that in the earlier slide, when you looked at the waterfall model, development was happening separately, testing was happening separately, operations was happening separately. All these things were happening in their own isolated worlds. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them and work in parallel in this way. So right now it's a cyclic process wherein the development team and the QA team are not two separate teams for me. They are integral part of my development process. And I'm also getting the operations team wherein basically I'm helping them release my application, help them monitor my application, and I'm trying to achieve everything in one tool which is called Azure DevOps. Again, there might be questions that, okay, fine, I'm using Azure DevOps, why not DevOps? There are two things out here, guys. Don't get confused about that. If, let's say, in the market outside, if you are an AWS DevOps engineer, meaning if you are basically an AWS DevOps engineer who has a background of AWS and are working on DevOps tools, you need to learn things like Jenkins, TeamCity, Octopus, and you basically need to understand something called Chef, Puppet, and all these things. All these tools together will help you perform something called as DevOps, where Azure said, you know what, why do you want to, basically invest in so many tools? Invest in one tool, which will replace all of them. That's called Azure DevOps. And that's the reason this profile altogether became an Azure DevOps engineer profile, when you'll primarily be working on Azure DevOps and you don't have to learn so many tools out here. So it makes your life easy. And it also makes the life of a company easy, because they don't have to basically maintain so many tools. They just have to maintain one tool which will help them maintain everything. This is what DevOps profile really is. And again, there is a lot of demand for this profile right now, guys. There is, let's say, the growth that I have seen in the last 2 or 3 years. It's a lot, and this is going to be here. This profile is going to be here. Reason being, this primarily works on cloud, and you basically need a cloud engineer always in your team, because a lot of now applications have been migrated to cloud. There are a lot of migrations into cloud, so you need this profile. So this profile is not going to go away. Again, a lot of questions that I get when we kind of begin is that when you say DevOps, it's development and operations. So do you need a knowledge of development? Do you need a coding background? No, you don't have to come from a coding background. You just need to understand how a code looks like. That's it. Which we will be looking in our course curriculum on, let's say, how do you work with a development team? What issues that you or what challenges that you'll face while you're working with a development team? And operations, again, do you basically come from a core operations background? No. Again, you don't need to have a core operations background. You need to understand how an operation team works. but you need to have a very solid understanding of how to use a tool called Azure DevOps, which our primary focus will be on, like what Azure DevOps is, what you do with that, and all those things out here. Again, just to give you a very overview of what we are going to learn out here, is that these are the things that we're going to cover. So we are going to start out with the very basics of cloud, like the very basics, like what really cloud is and what Azure really is as a cloud. What do you need to basically do in order to go ahead and work with a cloud called Azure? What is the skill set that you need? And then basically, as a DevOps engineer, right now automation is also a demand. Like how do you automate things? Okay, fine, you're working with Azure, great, but how do you basically automate things out? For which we need to understand a scripting language. I'm not talking about a programming language. We need to understand a scripting language called PowerShell, which is the, let's say, the primary bread and butter what we'll be relying upon. Then there is something called ARM templates for automation. This is something that we are going to look at. And then we are primarily focusing upon something known as Azure DevOps. Now, all these tools that you see on the left hand side of a screen are primarily tools that are offered by Microsoft. So all these things are native to Microsoft. So when I talk about Microsoft Azure, PowerShell, ARM templates, and Azure DevOps, all these are primarily, let's say, Microsoft. And also right now, there is a lot of demands for this tool also going up, which is called Dockers, Kubernetes, Terraforms, and all these things. So in our curriculum, we are going to start out with the basics of the cloud. We are going to understand what a cloud is. We are going to basically get a hint of what administration of a cloud really looks like. And then we are going to move to something called as DevOps. We are going to thoroughly understand what Azure DevOps really is. And then we are going into the open source side of the things, wherein we learn Docker, Terraform, and Jenkins out here. And how many days would I, or how many classes would it take for me to cover all these things? Like I would say I need somewhere around 55 to 60 hours of classes. I'm talking about 60 hours, meaning we do not have classes on Saturdays and Sundays, because Saturdays and Sundays are primarily meant for assignments. So I'll be giving a lot of assignments. I'll be helping you all to resolve those assignments out here. And also, let's say once the course gains up a little speed, we'll be taking mock interviews on Sundays. We'll be conducting mock interviews, and we'll be helping candidates understand how the interview procedure goes about, and etc. So that's something that we do on a Saturday and Sunday. And sometimes, let's say, if need be, meaning some topics in the course need somewhere around 2 hours to cover. Like in one class, I need 2 hours to cover. So we will take somewhere on a Saturday or a Sunday, we'll take those slots out here. So that's the primary idea that we do have. And I will at least need 60 classes, meaning at least need 60 hours. So it's going to take somewhere around 2 to 2.5 months to cover the entire thing. And once this is covered, you will be able to go ahead and give a certification called AZ104, which is Azure Administrator. And we are primarily targeting towards something called AZ400, Azure DevOps Engineer. These are the two things that we are focusing upon. Again, do you mandatorily need a certification? No, it's just an added benefit. So certification is not a criteria for you to crack a job. So if you give a job interview, they're not going to ask whether you need a certificate, whether you have a certification or not. It's just an option that we're basically helping you all with. And our main focus is going to be a job oriented course. Like we will pick up real time scenarios. We will help you all with one or two real time projects. So we are going to give you at the end of the course on how a real time project is. So for the batches right now that we are taking, we divide those batches into groups. We tell that one group is a developer, the other group is a QA. We try to simulate a project out here so that they can basically, whatever was covered in the last 50 to 60 days, they'll be able to go ahead and implement their knowledge using a project, which will make your life easy when you go inside a company. So this is what we are going to do. So apart from classes, regular doubt clarification sessions and everything, and also interview sessions, very importantly, because see, again, this is a goal oriented class, this is a job oriented class. So you need to basically understand what are the questions that interviewer asks, and according to which you can prepare things out. So that's something that we do. And it's going to be a 1 hour class, which is going to start from Monday. That is 14th, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, that's 14th. And the class timing is going to be 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. IST. This is the 1 hour slot basically that we'll be looking at. And again, it's going to take somewhere around 55 to 60 classes, minus the Saturdays and Sundays that we do have out here. So that's the
Is it only online classes, sir?
It is a combination of online and offline. So we have students attending offline as well. So it's up to you whether if you can come offline, you can come offline, or if you want to attend online, you can attend online. And again, if you miss a class, not to worry, we'll be recording everything out here and we'll be sharing the recording sessions with you all the same day. The
Online
recording
is
will be,
better, sir. Online is okay.
yes, you have the option. I mean, you basically, I'm just giving you the option. You have both of things, online and offline, and also we'll be giving recording sessions just in case if you're not able to make it to the class. You can go ahead, take the recording, download it into your system. Again, there is no expiration for that particular recording. You can download it into your local machine. You can hear it as many as times that you want. So that's something that we give out here. So any questions, guys? So that's it from my end. Like this, these were the slides that I wanted to cover. These are the topics, or these are the areas that I wanted to go over. So any questions for me? Anyone? Any questions for me as such? Anyone
Any other
online, offline? I am sorry, I didn't get your question.
do you have any other time slot other than 7 to 8?
As of now, this is the only timing. I'm sorry, this is the only timing that we do have. It's just 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. class that we do have. So we do not have an evening batch. We just have this 1 hour slot. Yes, any questions, guys? Online, offline, anyone, anything. I'm open to take as many as questions that you have. So whatever doubts, please go ahead and get it clarified. Yes. Do you have a question?
Do we have live classes, sir? I mean, projects after the completion of classes, live
After
projects.
live project, yes. So that's what I was talking about. Is that we'll be looking at two projects out here after the completion of classes. Those are going to be the real-time projects, basically what we deliver.
So nearly take for 3 months, sir.
I'm sorry.
Nearly the course will take 3 months, sir, to complete.
2.5, like calendar days, 2.5 months. Let's say in the hours, 60, 65 hours.
Okay.
Is there any difference between Azure
And you,
DevOps and DevOps?
I'm sorry. Can you give me
How can
one
I
quick?
attend?
Yeah, can you just give me one quick second? I was just taking a question offline, so I'll just attend to that question and come back to you. Is that
Okay.
okay? Yes.
Okay, sir. Is there any fee or how can I attend the regular basis?
Just give me a second. Just give me a minute. I'm just taking a question offline. Just give me a minute. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead. No. Difference here is in AWS.
Hello.
Just give me a second. I'm just answering a question. Okay. So the question here is that we have the similar tools in, let's say, AWS also, like Docker, the similar tool that is. Guys, can you please go on mute? Okay. So we have similar tools in AWS as well, like let's say Docker, Terraform, and all these things. So what is the difference out here is that yes, you use all these tools with a cloud or with a DevOps practice called AWS, meaning you implement this called on a platform called AWS. It'll be useful there also. Here you will use these tools primarily with Azure DevOps on a cloud called Azure. So we'll be connecting all these things out. No, Ansible we are not covering out here because you don't need a configuration management. That's being replaced by ARM. So you don't have to cover. I mean, you don't have to know Ansible out here. Okay. No, we don't cover Ansible here. Like I'm pretty sure we don't cover Ansible here. So Ansible is not covered. That's the reason I'm given it here. No, I'm not provide. I never provided Ansible. Ansible is something that we did not cover at all. Yes, guys, online someone had a question. Yes, please go. You can go ahead now.
Sir, can you give me your contact number?
Contact number is something that I won't be able to provide it right away, but you can contact the institute. You can basically go ahead contact the institute for any doubts you have.
Institute address, sir.
I'm sorry.
Institute address.
Is any more
Hello.
questions, guys?
Hello, sir. Is there any difference between Azure DevOps and DevOps?
Is there any difference between Azure DevOps and DevOps? Yes, meaning when you're talking about primarily DevOps, right? What people think is that DevOps is a combination of Jenkins, StallStack, a lot of open source tools out here. But if
Okay.
you are telling it is Azure DevOps, you have one tool replacing all those things out. And you'll primarily be working with a tool called Azure DevOps or with a technology called Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps is one solution that kind of replaces all these things out.
Okay. So is it possible to find a job only with Azure DevOps?
Definitely yes. Reason being, there is a lot of market for this right now. And if you go to LinkedIn and just type in Azure DevOps, there are roles that are only designed for Azure DevOps as such. So again, both a DevOps engineer and an Azure DevOps engineer are trying to achieve the same goal of a software development lifecycle. It's
Okay, yeah.
just the tool set that varies.
Okay. So, sir, one more question. This Jenkins and Terraform, this is not I mean, integral part of this Azure DevOps. This is outside tools, right?
Yes, this is outside DevOps. It's not integral part of the Azure DevOps, but
Okay.
we are at the end going to integrate both Docker, Terraform, whatever we learn with a tool called Azure DevOps. You'll see how to use Terraform, how to use Docker and everything with Azure DevOps as such.
Okay. So all these activities we can do in Azure DevOps also, only with Azure DevOps tools. But
Yes, only
these
with
are
Azure
extra.
DevOps.
Okay.
These are additional. Reason being, now the market demand is slightly tilting towards Terraform, containerization, and all these things out. So that's the
Okay.
reason we went ahead and added these two as well in the course curriculum.
Okay, sir. As in AWS, also these three tools will cover, or there is another tools in AWS.
So when you come from AWS background, then you need to cover, let's say, extensively on Jenkins. You need to have a tool called Puppet. You need to know a tool called Chef. You need to know a tool called Ansible that you were talking about, Ansible engine. So you need basically a lot of tools. So that's the reason Azure came in and said, "You know what, don't learn so many tools. You have one tool which will replace all these things." So,
Okay.
What topics you will cover, sir?
uh, just give me a second. Yes, go ahead, please. You had a question. Someone had a question.
Sir, which topics you will cover, sir?
That's right there on your screen. So it's going to be Azure,
These are
basics of Azure.
uh,
Yeah.
these are the topics, sir.
Yes, these are the topics in a nutshell. These are all the topics basically that we are going to look at in, let's say, I'm just
AWS
giving.
and Azure.
It's not, no, it's not AWS. It's only Azure that we're going to cover. So it's primarily going to be, we are primarily going to be working on Azure only. So I'm not going to cover AWS. Azure itself will take me somewhere around, good amount of sessions to complete out. So we're going to look at Azure. We're going to look at how to automate things on Azure. Again, if you're not from a programming background, not to worry. Again, I'm going to cover from the very basics of what PowerShell scripting is to help you all understand so that you all can be comfortable with that.
So, is it involved like coding too?
Sorry, I didn't get you. Any question?
Hello.
Basically, we will be completing Azure DevOps, right, sir?
Yes, so we will be completing Azure DevOps by the end of this course.
So do you provide any material?
No, material is something that we don't provide, but I can give you the links from where you can read it out. Because already there is a lot of link or there's a lot of reading material from a website called docs.azure.com, which is, let's say,
Okay.
the official documentation of Azure. So I'll go
Okay.
ahead and link to it, telling that where you need, what section you need, and etc. That will help you.
Sir, what about this PowerShell scripting? As of time, I mean, we don't have any like programming background, so we can learn it, or it will take time
Yes,
to
even if you do
understand.
not have a programming background, that's true. Even if you do not have a programming background, again, I'm getting a lot. Okay. Again, if you do not have a programming background, it's still okay with me. I am still okay without you having a programming background out here. We are going to start with the very basics of PowerShell. PowerShell is not a programming again; it's a scripting language. So there is a lot of difference between a programming and a scripting. So PowerShell primarily falls into a category of scripting, which makes it a little easier to learn. So I'll basically cover the very basics, the very foundation of, let's say, PowerShell. We're going to look at the advance of PowerShell and as to how, as a DevOps engineer, can use PowerShell as such. This is something that we are going to cover.
Sir, is it important to learn basic of cloud?
Yes, very important to learn the basics of cloud, and also we will go into the advanced concepts of cloud also. The reason I'm telling you need the basics of cloud is because as a DevOps engineer, you will be primarily be working on Azure DevOps. At the same time, you need to have the understanding of a cloud. So you need both the DevOps understanding and the cloud understanding to be a complete DevOps engineer out here. So that's the reason we'll be going into the cloud, looking at the concepts of cloud, and then coming to DevOps. That's the idea.
Okay, sir.
Any more?
Sir, as a cloud engineer, so are we supposed to, like DevOps engineer, are we supposed to know this development tools and also development side, programming language and all? Because
Uh,
we have to have both the teams, right? So,
you have to understand, meaning you have to basically understand how a team works, but you do not need
okay,
to have a programming background. Meaning, I never come from a programming background at all. I'm an administrator, but I still work with the development teams because I have a knowledge called DevOps. So you don't need to have the understanding of a program, meaning how a program works and all. That's not expected from your profile.
okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes, yes. You had a question. I'll just take a question offline, guys. Yes. Mhm. Again, see, when you're talking about something known as Git Bash, that's again a technology called Git. It works on a technology called Git. In Azure, you can use the same thing, Git Bash and everything. You can use the same thing, but there is something more easier. There are a couple of tools like Visual Studio and etc., which you can go ahead and achieve, meaning download the code, push the code, and all that stuff. So we'll be looking into that. We'll also be looking into the Git commands. So again, to answer to your question, yes, you can use Git Bash also in Azure to go ahead and download it. Same Git Bash also. You can use the same thing to go ahead and download things out. But we will be looking at an alternative for it because again, commands and again, it's not easier to kind of practice them. It's not easier to master them. So we'll be looking at tools which will help you master it. Be easier. Like Azure is going to be easier. It's mostly around graphical user interface out here. No, shell scripting basically works on Linux. Like, you need to have the Linux understanding when you say shell scripting. PowerShell, it's not, let's say, Linux. It's like you basically, do you know about a tool called CMD in your machine? Like when you do type CMD, you'll get a command prompt, right? Wherein you'll basically write a few commands. PowerShell is like CMD. So PowerShell is the alternative for shell scripting out here. Any more questions here, guys? Anyone? Anything else? Yeah, please go ahead. Yes. We in let's say in all the earlier batches also we have there are a lot of people who are migrating from mechanical background into the IT, so they're able to successfully go into the industry. It's just going to be initial one to understand what is happening, to follow the tech terminology and etc. But after that, it's going to be easy. So that's the reason I'm telling that in let's say in the weekends, I'll give a lot of assignments and also take a lot of interviews basically, so that students from every background, irrespective of whether IT or non-IT, will be able to come on a level playing field. That's what is the intention. Yes.
Sir, is there any last question for us?
Only guys, only just give me one quick second. So the question here on the offline is that in the future, do you have to migrate to AWS DevOps? Not really, because as of now, the trend right now is that a lot of people are migrating from AWS DevOps into Azure DevOps. A lot of projects are also migrating from AWS to Azure. So you don't really have to have, let's say, or you don't really need to migrate to AWS DevOps as well. That's true. Is it possible
Sir,
with, let's say, just give me a second. I'm just answering. Give me a second. Is it possible to go to it? Yes. Every cloud works on an underlying technology, on an underlying basic technology, whether be it Azure, whether be it AWS, everything kind of works on an underlying technology. So we are going to look at that underlying technology out here. So it's easy. It will be easy for you. Definitely, yes. You need to learn a few tools like Chef, Puppet, and all these things out. But it's not going to be that difficult for you to let's say migrate out if you want to. Yes, it's not difficult. Yes, someone had a, I can take it right now.
Sir, is there any lab session for us?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear your voice.
Is there any lab session for us?
Is there any lab session? What you're talking? I am sorry, I didn't get your question again.
Yes, yes, sir.
Please. Okay, lab sessions. Yes, again, this course is a combination of theory and practical. So there's going to be a lot of practical basically to help you all get hands-on. So yes, there'll be lab sessions wherein I will tell you all what to do, let's say in the lab, meaning what to do, let's say, and we can discuss about it on what is the solution for it and how is the approach for it and everything. So that's going to be the approach. Any more questions, guys? Before I close, any more questions?
Yes, sir. Are we supposed to know the basics of AWS in order to understand Azure DevOps concepts, or it's not required?
No, not required at all. Like the prerequisite for learning this course is zero. Like I don't even need someone to come from let's say an IT background to begin with. So you don't need to
Mm-hmm.
know AWS to begin with to begin with Azure. No, you do not have to know that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Anything else, guys? Anyone? Anything else? Offline, online? Yes. So no, we don't provide machines. We do not have basically machines out here. You need to get your own laptops. You need to get your own laptops and I'm sorry. Yes, yes. Not 24/7 because I am also an employee. Like I mean, you can send me across an email. So what normally students do is that they send out an email to me. I'll resolve over the email. So I'll be there to support you. Like if you send an email to me, I probably may not reply to you the same minute, but it'll take like about an hour or two to go ahead and reply to it. But your doubts will be clarified. You can, if let's say the doubt is still not clarified over the email, you can ask it in the class and we can talk over it. Anything else, guys?
When will the class started, sir?
So the first class will begin on Monday, which is the 14th of February.
From Monday onwards?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
We are going to start with the basics of cloud. Basics of cloud. The first initial 1 week is going to be the basics of cloud only. Like how do you interact with Azure? What do you need to interact with Azure and everything. This is everything that is. Yes. Yes. In the first initial sessions, new topics as in like everything is going to be a new topic because it's Azure. How do you go into Azure? How do you interact with Azure? How do you create resources on Azure or something that I will be covering in the first week. And then we'll start with PowerShell and everything. Yes, we provided you. The recording session will be provided. Any more questions, guys, before we close? Okay,
Sir,
guys.
recording sessions will be provided in email, right? Like, I'm not.
So the recording sessions, what's going to happen is that just go ahead and send across a message to the same number from where you got the link. You will get a link to download the recording session. So just click on the link and have the recording session downloaded. And after let's say about a week, we are going to go ahead and create a WhatsApp group. So with everyone, whoever like interested in the class, we'll go ahead and create a WhatsApp group, and we will post the daily links there. So you can go ahead and download the recording from there.
Sure, sure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Thank you. We'll meet on Monday and we'll start our journey with Azure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.